how Machiavelli saw through every lie. Most people think of Niccolo Machiavelli as a manipulator, a cold strategist who taught tyrants how to lie, cheat, and dominate. But that's not the full story. What if I told you Machiavelli wasn't teaching us how to lie, he was teaching us how to see lies? Not just in politics, but in everyday life, but in the people we trust, in the stories we tell ourselves. Machiavelli saw through every illusion because he understood a terrifying truth. Beneath the surface of every society, every relationship, every moral code, there's a layer of fear, control, and strategy. And most people don't want to see it. They'd rather believe in the comfort of appearances. But Machiavelli chose clarity over comfort. He wanted us to see the world not as we wish it to be, but as it is. And that's what made him dangerous. That's why we still talk about him centuries later. In this video, I want to take you on a journey, not just through his philosophy, but through the way he peeled back the world's mask and forced us to confront the game we're all playing, whether we admit it or not. Let's start with something Machiavelli understood better than most. Morality is often a mask for power. Think about that. We're taught to believe that people act from goodness, that leaders make decisions based on ethics, that society is built on shared values. But Machiavelli didn't buy that. He saw how power uses morality as a tool, not to serve truth, but to control perception. A ruler doesn't need to be good, he just needs to appear good. And that's not just politics. That's your boss. That's your favorite influencer. That's even you, when you say something you don't believe just to fit in. Machiavelli asked, is it better to be loved or feared? But what he really meant was, are you willing to be seen as cruel if it means achieving something greater? And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most people aren't. Most people live in fear of being disliked. But Machiavelli wasn't promoting cruelty. He was revealing a deeper truth, that our obsession with being seen as good makes us manipulable. If you need to be liked, you've already lost, because someone else can weaponize that need against you.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now pause for a second. Let's ask something dangerous. How often do we lie to ourselves in the name of virtue? How often do we pretend our decisions are pure when they're really driven by fear, by ego, by competition? Machiavelli would say, constantly. And not because we're evil, but because we're human. He saw through the stories we tell ourselves. He understood that humans are driven by self-interest, status, and survival. But instead of condemning that, he studied it. That's what made him radical. He didn't say humans should be better. He said, let's understand how humans are and build from there. And that's a huge philosophical shift. It's the difference between idealism and realism, and between designing systems that assume people will act nobly and systems that account for the fact that they won't. Machiavelli wasn't cynical, he was precise. And that precision is what allows us to cut through the noise today. Because let's be honest, we live in a world of performance. Everything is branding. Everything is curated. Politicians, companies, even individuals, we all craft narratives to appear virtuous. But Machiavelli would ask, what's the strategy behind the story? Who benefits from this perception? Who is being controlled by it? And are you willing to look past the story to see the structure beneath? That's what Machiavelli trained his readers to do, to think like tacticians, not just spectators. And that's why his ideas are more relevant now than ever. In a world of fake smiles, filtered lives, and moral grandstanding, Machiavelli gives us a weapon, the ability to see, and to strip away the illusion and ask, what's really happening here? Not what they're saying, not what they want you to believe, but what's the actual mechanism of power at work? And once you learn to see that, you stop getting played. You start playing the game with your eyes open. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Machiavelli didn't just dissect power, he also understood the cost of clarity. He knew that if you see too much, feel too much, think too deeply, you risk isolation. You no longer fit into the comforting illusions that bind most people together. And that's a lonely place. That's why The Prince was so controversial. Not because it was evil, but because it was honest. Too honest. People don't like having their myths exposed. They don't want to hear that their leaders are actors, their morals are tools, their ideas are influenced by fear. But Machiavelli believed that truth, no matter how brutal, is the only foundation for real power. And that truth isn't just political. It's personal. So I'll ask you, what illusions are you clinging to because they make you feel safe? Who would you become if you stopped pretending to be virtuous and started becoming strategically honest? That's the real challenge Machiavelli offers us. Not to become cruel, but to become clear. To stop lying to ourselves about what motivates us. To stop assuming that goodness always wins. And to start asking harder questions. What does it take to protect what matters? What are you willing to risk to build something that lasts? Machiavelli saw through every lie because he wasn't trying to be right, he was trying to be effective. And that mindset is rare. Most people want to be seen as good, smart, moral. But Machiavelli wanted to understand. He wanted to build systems that worked, even when humans didn't. That's why he studied history so obsessively. Because history doesn't lie, it repeats. And if you watch closely, you'll see the same patterns playing out today, just with better lighting and prettier packaging. If Niccolo Machiavelli were alive today, he wouldn't be shocked by anything, not the filters, the influencers, the outrage cycles, or even the way truth is manipulated and reshaped to serve whatever narrative is trending. In fact, I believe he'd feel disturbingly at home. Why? Because Machiavelli didn't just study power, he studied the performance of power. And the world we live in now is one giant performance. Everything is optics. Everything is curated. Everything is engineered to trigger a specific reaction, admiration, fear, trust, envy. But beneath all of it, Machiavelli would see the same pattern he saw 500 years ago. Power is rarely what it seems. It hides in smiles. It cloaks itself in virtue. It wears the mask of for your own good. And unless you've trained your eyes to see through that mask, you will be used by it. That's what Machiavelli understood long before social media existed. He saw how image could dominate substance, and how the most dangerous form of control is the one that hides behind the illusion of care. Let's think about influencers, not just the ones on social media, but anyone who influences perception, politicians, CEOs, even spiritual leaders. We often assume influence is about truth or talent. But Machiavelli would laugh at that. He'd say, influence is about perception controlling what people think they see. And when you control perception, you control behavior. That's why influencers don't need to be experts. They just need to be trusted. And trust, in modern society, isn't earned through truth, it's earned through image. A clean aesthetic, a convincing tone, a story that feels right. But here's the catch: truth doesn't always feel right. Sometimes it feels harsh or inconvenient or boring. And so we choose comfort over clarity. Machiavelli would call that a fatal error. Because the moment you choose to be entertained by the world rather than educated by it, you become a pawn. And pawns don't shape history. They get sacrificed by it. That's why Machiavelli was so obsessed with deception, not because he loved liars, but because he knew deception was the currency of influence. And the best deceivers are the ones who believe their own lies. Think about that. The most dangerous leaders, the most persuasive influencers, the most effective manipulators aren't the ones who know they're deceiving you. They're the ones who believe they're saving you. They're the ones who've wrapped their ambition in a story of virtue. And that's why it's so hard to see through them, because they're not acting. They're convinced, and so are you. So Machiavelli would ask, what narratives do you believe because they feel good? What truths do you accept simply because they're popular? In the age of influence, the line between sincerity and manipulation is almost invisible. But if you don't learn to see it, you'll keep giving your attention and your power to people who don't deserve it. But here's the deeper layer. Machiavelli didn't just teach us how to spot manipulation, he taught us how to resist it. And the key is this: know what game you're in. Most people are playing the wrong game. They think life is about being liked, going viral, appearing successful. But Machiavelli would say, those are illusions. The real game is durability, strategic positioning, be understanding the terrain. And to win that game, you need more than charisma. You need clarity. You need to see the rules no one talks about. That the person who speaks the loudest isn't always the one with the most power. B, that the one who seems humble may be hiding ruthless ambition. That virtue signaling is often just camouflage. Machiavelli saw all of this in Renaissance Italy, and we're seeing it now, globally, just with faster internet and better branding. So the question becomes, are you building a life based on what looks good or on what is strategically sound? Are you chasing applause or building leverage? Let me give you a real-world example. Imagine two people. One is loud, charismatic, always in the spotlight. The other is quiet, calculated, rarely praised in public. Who's more powerful? Most people choose the first. But Machiavelli would look deeper. He'd ask, who has more control? Who has more options? Who can move without being noticed? Because power isn't about attention. It's about positioning. It's not about how many followers you have, it's about how irreplaceable you are. And that's a kind of power most people never even think about. Because they're too busy climbing ladders that lead nowhere, too busy branding themselves instead of building themselves. Machiavelli would call that tragic. Not because it's immoral, but because it's ineffective. And if there's one thing Machiavelli hated, it was wasted potential. People who could have become something great, but got lost in the theater of being liked. So how do we apply this? How do we become people who see through the age of influence, who stop being manipulated by optics and start mastering substance? First, we develop intellectual detachment. That means learning to observe people without immediately judging them. Not asking, do I like this person? But rather, what are they doing? Why are they doing it? What does this reveal about their strategy? Second, we build inner leverage. That means cultivating skills, knowledge, and psychological strength that no one can take from you. Not so you can brag, but so you don't need to. And third, we practice strategic silence. Sometimes the most powerful move is not to speak, not to defend, not to perform. Just watch. Learn. Position yourself. That's the Machiavellian mindset, not cruelty, but clarity. Not manipulation, but mastery. In the final part, we're going to take everything we've learned and bring it back to the soul. Because while Machiavelli studied power, what he really uncovered was freedom. The freedom to see. The freedom to act with precision. The freedom to stop playing roles and start playing reality. And that freedom isn't just for rulers or elites, it's for anyone willing to look through the lie behind the smile and ask, what's really going on here? At first glance, Machiavelli seems like the last person you'd associate with ethics. But after all, he told rulers to be willing to deceive, to betray, to be feared rather than loved. But if you stop there, you miss the entire point. Because Machiavelli's ethics weren't about appearances, they were about consequences. He wasn't interested in whether something looked good. He was interested in whether it worked. And if you're honest with yourself, that's what most people care about deep down but are too afraid to admit. We want to believe that goodness always wins, that truth prevails on its own. But Machiavelli looked at history and saw something else. Truth without power dies in silence, and virtue without strategy gets eaten alive. So he asked the harder question, how do you build a life, or a kingdom, or a legacy that survives in a corrupt world without being corrupted by it? This is where Machiavelli's hidden ethics come into play. He wasn't promoting cruelty for its own sake. He was showing us the cost of naivety. He believed the greatest moral failure wasn't harshness, it was weakness. Because weakness, in the wrong hands, leads to chaos. A weak leader doesn't bring peace. They create a power vacuum that invites worse people to take control. A dishonest world cannot be fixed with honest intentions alone. It requires courage, precision, even ruthlessness when necessary. And that when necessary is the part most people miss. Machiavelli didn't say always be cruel. He said, be willing to be cruel when the situation demands it. That's not immorality. That's moral clarity, knowing that sometimes protecting the greater good means getting your hands dirty. But how many people around you are afraid to do what's right because it looks wrong? And how much damage has been done by that fear, that paralysis, that obsession with appearances? But here's where the real twist comes in. Machiavelli wasn't giving advice just for rulers. He was giving advice for you, because each of us rules something: our time, our energy, our relationships, our mind. And if we don't rule those well, someone else will. Some ideology, some trend, some manipulator. But that's why his message is still urgent. If you don't master yourself, you will be mastered by someone else. But self-mastery isn't just about discipline, it's about seeing clearly, seeing your own motives, seeing your own lies, seeing the ways you pretend to be nice when you're really afraid, or the ways you avoid conflict by dressing it up as kindness. Machiavelli would say, stop lying to yourself. Stop pretending your inaction is virtue. Start acting from clarity, not comfort. And that's hard, but it's also liberating. Because once you stop needing to be seen as good, you can finally start being effective. So what does this inner freedom look like? It looks like someone who doesn't flinch from reality, someone who can walk into a room full of lies and not be infected by them, someone who doesn't chase validation because they've already validated themselves, and someone who can lead not with illusions, but with insight. That's the Machiavellian ideal, not a tyrant, not a schemer, but a strategist with a soul, someone who knows the game but won't lose themselves in it. And that's the kind of power most people never find, not because it's impossible, but because it requires seeing through every comforting illusion we've been raised in, that the world rewards virtue, that honesty is enough, that intention matters more than execution. But Machiavelli would say, if your intentions don't survive contact with the real world, they were never good enough to begin with. So I'll leave you with this. What if the point of philosophy isn't to make you feel better, but to make you sharper? What if truth isn't something you find, but something you build, by looking at the world without flinching? That's what Machiavelli gave us, not a license to be cruel, but a challenge to be clear. A dare to rise above performance and choose power with precision, to stop being manipulated by appearances and start shaping your own reality, not with lies, but with strategy, not with noise, but with vision, not with shallow morality, but with deep, disciplined truth.